France, that country on the other side of the English Channel, known for its art, culture, culinary tradition, and being worse in every single way than the country that I come from. You could take a look at any French city from Brest to Bordeaux to Besançon and think that this is one country united and proud, and it is, for the most part. Through centuries of conquest, colonizing, and Congress of Vienna-ing its way through the annals of history, France managed to build itself into one of the first modern nation-states. But of course, for every nation-state that graces the world map today, there's a handful that would never come to be. As with the Bretons, the Burgundians, and the Basque, the Occitanians are a people that had been snuffed out for the French dream of going around on a bicycle with a string of onions around your neck to be fully realised. If you're anything like me, you've probably heard the name Occitania before, but don't really know anything about it. That's where I come in. By the end of today, you'll be just like me, an ardent supporter of our brothers and sisters held down by those fiendish frogs. Let's talk a bit about Occitania. Occitania is a region comprising most of what we would now call the south of France, stretching from the Atlantic coast in the west to the Italian border in the east. The area has its own dialects, distinct culture and architecture, like this town which looks strangely like the background of Wet Dry World from Super Mario 64. Despite being firmly within the grasp of France for over 1,000 years, the Occitan culture is most likely closest to Catalan. In fact, the only place today where you'll find Occitania as an official language is Catalonia, due to the French government's insistence on monolingualism. Despite these efforts by the Parisians, Occitan can still be found on some road signs, like these ones in Toulouse. Though Occitan is generally considered to be a single language, the language itself has few modern writing conventions and is mostly left up to the various dialects of the language. In reality, the idea of Occitania by that name is a rather recent convention, only dating back to the Age of Enlightenment, though the Occitan culture and languages are arguably just as old, if not older, than those currently seated today in Paris. Though for us to tell that story, we need to look at the formation of both. As is well documented, after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Latin language began to splinter into many smaller ones, and as time went by, it became clear that the Roman Empire was a thing of the past, with these new splinter languages needing names. But how do you name these languages that only 100 or so years ago were no more than British English and American English? They got around this problem by using a word that divided them the most: yes. As time went by, most of these languages stopped using their own words to name themselves and started using other means. Portuguese named itself after a town, Spanish and Italian named themselves after former Roman provinces, and only two remained from there, Languedoc and Languedoc. Languedoc was the name of the language family spoken by the people north of the Loire River, whereas Languedoc was dominant everywhere below it. As time went by, Languedoc was picked up by the people in charge of what was then the Kingdom of France and just kind of became French. Languedoc didn't have this national binding. As such, the opposite happened, with Languedoc becoming the name of a region of France, and the language itself just splintering and being referred to by the towns and cities it was spoken in, most notably Limousin, named after the province of Limousin. The name Occitan was eventually created by French clerks in the 14th century as an overarching name for the languages that had been, at that point, slowly drifting apart. The name itself is a portmanteau of Oc, the old word for yes, and Aquitanian, the nationality that a majority of the people in Occitania were a part of. Despite not having a nation to call their own, the people of Occitania would enjoy a golden age of art, culture and autonomy. At the beginning of the second millennium, Occitania would come mostly under the control of the Kingdom of France, but would for the most part be left to do its own thing. This allowed the Occitan people to worry less about having their village burnt down by parties of raiding Moors, and spend more time developing their art and culture. Nowhere was this seen more than in Occitania's Troubadours, and after doing my research on these guys, I love them. I love them so much. The Troubadours were an almost exclusively Occitan group. Their tradition began around the 1300s, and to this day no one is quite sure how they came to be. The biggest pool of evidence I could find is that they took from Arabic poetry brought in from Spain. But what I can tell you is that these guys were cool as hell! These troubadours were court poets whose works were often amorous in nature, and they would go on to pioneer the concept of courtly love in Europe. These poems were often performed in song, and sometimes in, to quote this book by Fiona Swaby, surprisingly complex meters and intricate rhythms, which is music talk for they were medieval metal guitarists, basically. These troubadour trendsetters were not the only pillar of Occitania's golden age. The language itself gained a reputation across Europe as a language of love and courtly life in Western Europe, seeing use as far away as the corners of Germany. It's likely that these Occitan cultural traditions seeped their way into the lands beyond the Loire and helped pave the way for the reputation of French as a culture of love. These days of Occitanian bards and courtly love would soon be undone, however, as Europe would move away from the feudal model and France would begin to solidify itself into a modern nation-state. In 1539, King Francis I issued the Ordinance of Villers-Cotterêts, with the main goal of removing Latin from all official documents in France. This ordinance required that from then on, all official documents in the kingdom had to be written in Parisian French. This inadvertently would begin the decline of Occitan, as it was now banned from being used in any official documents, including those of local affairs. This wasn't a problem for the upper class in Aquitaine or Languedoc though, as they had already become well acquainted with Parisian French. It was the lay folk in the south of the Loire who were outcast by the French court. From here, the French government was to the Occitan people not a legitimate government, but an occupying force. French dramatist Jean-Baptiste Racine wrote of the Occitan animosity in 1662 during a stay in the town of Ussé, stating, "What they call France here is the land beyond the Loire, which to them is a foreign country." Fortunately for the people of this region, there was another group who felt as though the French government wasn't legitimate. At the advent of the French Revolution, there was a plan to reinstate the autonomy of Occitania, referred to by the revolutionaries as the Midi regions. Unfortunately, the people promoting this idea would soon find themselves overthrown by the Jacobins, who would become the party finding a way to justify France's unity without the monarch. In the end, like Catholicism, hereditary rule, and the calendar, I'll make a video about this someday, the Occitan language needed to be erased to unite the French people under the new republic. French was to remain the only language spoken in the courts because apparently old habits die harder than kings do. In fact, French was the only language recognised in France. At the stroke of a pen, the new French government had, for the most part, written Occitan out of existence in the country. Towards the end of the next century, French reformist Jules Ferry would mandate the punishment for speaking Occitan or any other language outside of standard French in schools. By doing this, Occitan would become the language of the elderly and would die out within a generation. The 20th century would be referred to by the Occitan people as La Begogne, which directly translates to the shaming. La Begogne is the Occitan term for the state-sanctioned linguicide that the French government was instigating. Occitan was designated not as a language, but as a patois, a corrupted form of French that needed to be done away with. The Occitan language would have nearly 14 million speakers at the outbreak of the Great War, but by the year 1999, only 800,000 of those would remain, and that's the generous estimate. A sane person would call this a tragedy, a cultural genocide even. The French government had called that a success. According to the French government, there was no Occitan, no Occitanians, and no Occitania, at least not one of any cultural distinction. It was all France. The bilingual street signs aren't even there for the people anymore. They're just for tourism. I was hoping to end this off with a happy ending. Some statement of, oh, despite the French government's best efforts, Occitan is a thriving language and stands proudly as a bastion of southern France. Yeah, no. According to UNESCO, Occitan is considered severely endangered, and it's likely Occitan won't live to see the next 100 years or so. However, languages that go extinct can be revived, so unless Macron goes all 1930s Germany on Occitan literature, we still have a chance. I say it's time we show the French government what for and bring about a new age for the Occitan language. God bless Occitania.